Hi.
Hello, everyone.
We are continuing with Ray's analysis of the Watchtower's interpretation of other sheep and the teachings of John chapter 10. Starting on page 471. Despite all the intricate argumentation, it seems evident that a true Christian is a true Christian. The inspired scriptures themselves plainly know and present no other kind. All who hear the Good Shepherd's voice are called on to show the same kind of faith and love, the same fruitage of God's Spirit, enjoying the same relationship with Him as sons. Two different kinds of Christian sheep is the product of human invention. Right within the Bible we find a passage that remarkably parallels that of John 10:16, namely what the Apostle Paul wrote at Ephesians chapter 2, verses 11 to 18. There, in place of two groups of sheep, the apostles refer to two peoples, Jews and Gentiles, and says, according to the New World Translation,
Therefore, keep bearing in mind that formerly you were people of the nations as to flesh. Uncircumcision you were called by that which is called circumcision, made in the flesh with hands. That you were at that particular time without Christ, alienated from the state of Israel, and strangers to the covenants of the promise. And you had no hope and were without God in the world. But now, in union with Christ Jesus, you who were once far off have come to be near by the blood of the Christ. For he is our peace, he who made the two parties one, and destroyed the wall in between that fenced them off. By means of his flesh he abolished the enmity, the law of commandments consisting in decrees, that he might create the two peoples in union with himself into one new man, and make peace, and that he might fully reconcile both peoples in one body to God through the torture state, because he had killed off the enmity by means of himself. And he came and declared the good news of peace to you, the ones far off, and peace to those near, because through him we, both peoples, have the approach to the Father by one Spirit.
all the elements found in John 10:16 are found here. Though it uses a different analogy from that of sheep, it says the same thing, presents the same picture. It shows that in addition to the Jewish believers, or sheep, the Gentile believers, or sheep, heard the good news, the voice of the shepherd, Christ. And through Christ, the two peoples are made into one body, or one flock, under him as their head, their one shepherd.
To say then that understanding the other sheep in John 10:16 as relating to the Gentile believers disagrees with other Bible scriptures bearing on the subject is exactly the opposite to the facts. That understanding is totally harmonious, not only with Paul's statement just quoted, but with all the rest of the scriptures. From the time of God's promise to Abraham forward, the scriptures continually pointed forward to and prophesied of the time when God would join people of all nations into one people, his people under his Messiah. Seen against that background, Jesus' statement is easily understood, with no complicated, intricate arguments needed to explain it. Rather than being in disharmony with scriptures bearing on the subject, in view of all the prophecies pointing to this, it would be most unusual if Jesus had not given a parable illustrating the entry of Gentiles into unity with Jewish believers. And then he mentions that the other famous text that they use to prove that there's a small group of heavenly bound Christians and an enormous group of others called a great crowd, Revelation 7 verses 9 to 17. He has an appendix on that, which we'll get to at the end of the book. But I thought in the assembling of scriptures at the bottom of the page to prove that God always had this in mind, this uniting of believers. He's got the more famous ones, if you're a witness, with Genesis 12, the Abrahamic covenant, and then the follow-ups to that in Genesis 22 and 28. and a few others. But among the others, he's got Isaiah 19:23 to 25, which is well worth reading because most witnesses aren't familiar with this one.
Okay. In that day there will come to be a highway out of Egypt to Assyria, and Assyria will actually come into Egypt, and Egypt into Assyria, and they will certainly render service, Egypt with Assyria. In that day Israel will come to be the third with Egypt and with Assyria, namely a blessing in the midst of the earth, because Jehovah of armies will have blessed it, saying, Blessed be my people, Egypt, and the work of my hands, Assyria, and my inheritance, Israel.
The Silver Sword version, the New Edition, says about, in verse 23, then Assyria will come into Egypt, and Egypt into Assyria, and Egypt will serve God together with Assyria. Now this text, although we're not familiar with witnesses in our witness life, probably because it obviously has implications as to the scene on the earth. This is not so much about believers, Jew and Gentile, going to their heavenly destiny with Messiah. This is about earthly things. So it's more about God's will being done on earth as it is in heaven.
And it's never happened where these, which are considered enemies of each other in certain times of history.
So here you have another Old Testament text, like the ones we said were stolen. We'll get to that in a minute. Stolen by the Watchtower to buttress its idea that the great majority of mankind will live on the earth. But this text is the Isaiah concept of the kingdom, when nations that today, or even then, were alien to the true God, that is the God of Israel, Yahweh. Yeah. These then were serving many gods. They were polytheistic states, Egypt and Assyria. But today we know what they are. They are serving the God Allah. And Christians and Jews and Muslims, of course, are all in conflict about where all this is going. But Isaiah plainly teaches that one day
there'll be a unity there. All
one day
serving the God of Israel.
Yeah. So whoever's living in the other nations, and almost all of them nowadays are Muslim, will one day recognize the God of Israel, who is also, of course, the God of Christians. So this is an amazing prophecy, but I think the point is that it's about earthly things. It's not about the Church of Jesus Christ and who's going to heaven. Yeah. The kingdom, really.
It's God's purpose to unite all people on the earth.
We wanted to attach a couple of videos we've done about this John explicitly. One is in the series, the playlist, What JW.org is Not Telling You About Death and Life. It's on John chapter 6, but also on John 10, the other sheep passage. So we'll put that on your screen, along with the playlist, because that's number 3 in the playlist, actually. And Genesis and another one on John come before it. So we'll put the playlist up as well. And next time, Shifting Winds of Doctrine.